And welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just. With me is Mr. John Cameron, and I hope you're having a good evening. You know, John, something happened yesterday that boggles the mind of anybody who thinks logically, right? Just anybody who has any type of logical thinking. Some of these climate activists went to Stonehenge on the, as people were preparing for the summer solstice, and they decided to essentially paint Stonehenge with orange paint to stop oil. These people are morons, John. And I generally don't like to be that definitive on these guys. That these people are complete and utter morons. Because they're hurting their own cause. At this stage, they're literally hurting their own cause.
So, I think it's Just Stop Oil, or is it Just Stop Big Oil?
I think it's Just Stop Oil.
Just Stop Oil. Guess who finances Just Stop Oil?
Oh, was that
George
Soros guy
Soros?
again? Yeah.
Yeah, imagine that. So anyway, folks, these are the people who go, literally thousands of them. You would think Woodstock erupted in the middle of England. Stonehenge is one of my favorite places on the planet. I've been there a whole once. I'm a pagan. I was up watching the sunrise on the American River this morning because the summer solstice is one of my high holy days. Technically, it's not until about 8 o'clock till night, until about 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, but any chance to celebrate. And so these climate activists, the problem is they shouldn't be called activists. They should be called religious zealots, because they've taken environmentalism, and I care about nature so much that I want to see the tax farms in Altamont Pass taken down so they don't kill another 1,000 golden eagles, right? So I'm in favor of nuclear power. So they believe that somehow doing this stuff will make other people believe the craziness that they believe. The leaders of the believers of CO2 as being bad and increasing the world temperature, they do not believe the stuff that these people believe. These are talking about the scientific heads that promote this, that are looked to as the experts. They certainly don't believe in vandalizing things to make a point. And this is a high holy place for a lot of people. It is for me, right? It's been around. I don't trust any religion that hasn't been around for less than 5,000 years, folks. So Stonehenge has been around at least 5,000 years. And all they do is make fools of themselves. And you can watch the video online. A little lady who was there as a tourist ran up to try to stop them from doing this, right? So it's just nuts. I mean, throwing soup on old masters. We're talking about paintings that are worth $100 million, but not just the monetary worth. This is art that is loved by hundreds of thousands. How can you possibly make your point? And what's really cool, J.K. Rowling, my current favorite writer, she writes some of the best mysteries in the world. Plug for J.K. Rowling under John Galbraith. She said, you people are so stupid that doing this stuff, now everybody thinks you actually work for big oil, because what you're doing is not having the effect that you want it to have. It's having the opposite effect.
Well, and that brings up a question, John. If the impact of these protests, we'll call them, to use a polite word, is the exact opposite of what they claim to want. Mm-hmm. Well, they can't be that dumb. All of them can't be that dumb. So what are they really trying to accomplish? Because it can't be what they claim, because that's not the path that we're going down.
Well, now see, here's the thing, though. But you can find people stupid enough to believe anything. And those are the people that are doing this. The people running them, who knows what those people are trying to run. But I can tell you that George Soros is also one of the huge investors in the offshore wind farms on the East Coast, which are basically making the right whales extinct. So, some money there. He feeds money to this nonprofit organization, Just Stop Oil, to stop the production of oil, while making hundreds of millions of dollars off of alternative / renewable / natural energy. Follow the money, folks.
And as we all know, that none of those projects make any money without government subsidies.
Zero.
So yeah, we know how that goes. And these protesters with, we're going to use that term loosely.
How about vandals? How about criminals?
In
how
this
about
particular case,
how about cowards? Because they always have masks on. You notice that?
In this particular case, you're correct, John, because these pro-Palestinian protesters have broken into and vandalized a Kent factory. Now, this is a Kent factory that was actually making weapons, well, not weapons, they were making parts of weapons for Israel. It was the claim. The issue is, so what?
Yeah.
And they also broke into a bank, and I guess because a bank has,
bank has money and they wanted some money. No, the bank is supplying money to support Israel. Okay.
Yeah, so the bank is just doing what banks do, is they have a customer, and the customer happens to work in Israel, and they're unhappy with that. And so they break into a bank, they vandalize banks, they break into a factory and try to damage equipment. And, the question is, at one point, do you stop calling them protesters and just simply call them criminals?
Thugs.
Because that's, at this
Cowards.
stage, that's what they are.
Cowards. These are criminals. I don't want to give credence to any of these climate vandals, but they weren't wearing masks, which is strange. They wanted to be celebrated for their stupidity. If these people, let's not call them protesters. They're not protesting. They're vandalizing. Protesting means Martin Luther King protested, right? Martin Luther King was effective because he didn't do stupid stuff, right? You do stupid stuff, people are going to think, well, wait a second, the person that's doing that is an idiot. So I was kind of leaning their way, but now I need to examine the facts because I don't want to be an idiot. Literally, they're shooting themselves in the foot.
Again and again. And this is one of these things, John, that we experience here in this country, in our universities, where the pro-Palestinian protesters, people had some sympathy for them, right up until they started breaking things and preventing people from going to class and preventing graduation ceremonies and preventing people from going to finals weeks. And, people were sympathetic right up until they actually started preventing average people from going about their day. And it's one thing, a protest can create it's one thing to create an inconvenience, right? Because you get inconvenienced for all kinds of things all the time.
Well, the state of California inconveniences me to no end.
I mean, a car accident can inconvenience someone as you're driving around town. So a protest that blocks off a street for a couple hours, that's fine. But once you start occupying places, and once you start preventing people from going about their...
I think if people stop traffic, they should be, the civil suit should be brought against them, and they should be made to pay for the lost wages of every single person they stopped in their tracks.
Well, I actually think it depends. If you're on a city street where people can get around and you're just inconvenienced, where it's just an inconvenience. Now, if you're trapping people on a freeway, you should be immediately arrested.
In England, people have died in ambulances because they couldn't get past these protesters. And they're saying, well, a few lives to make a major point. Fine, if you want to make a point, set yourself on fire and videotape it, okay?
Yeah, you're not.
My wife says that saying that is evil. You want to make a point, suck it up, light yourself on fire. People will watch that. I wouldn't. I know that's mean-spirited, but I'm getting really tired of people deciding that whatever the whim of the minute is, they can throw it in my face and I have to somehow watch it. I mean, I could pull some kind of crazy stunt out. And I'm a pretty shrewd guy. I could inconvenience probably 1 million people if I put my mind to it. But it's just wrong. It's just wrong.
Well, but an inconveniences happen. And so I don't worry so much about actual inconveniences. But if you're talking about blocking freeways or blocking a road that has no other way to get out, if you're in a downtown grid and someone blocks a block, no one cares because it's easy to get around. It's easy to get around. But you're blocking off a freeway.
Go over.
You should be immediately arrested. But these kind of protests and activism have consequences.
Let's call them something different. This kind of vandalism, this kind of violence, this kind of crime.
Yeah, they do have consequences. And, in the Eurozone, they are actually facing the potential consequences of this type of behavior. And so let's see what Mr. Richard Fields has to say about this.
He's always got something good to say.
Hi, this is Richard Fields with this week's Report from the Fields. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "You can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Recent elections in Europe prove this point. It's becoming clear that a whole lot of voters are no longer being fooled by climate change hysteria. Elections were held throughout the Eurozone for seats in the European Parliament recently. Parties on the right and center-right gained seats at the expense of Liberal and Green parties, which were decimated. Center-left and center-right parties' representation was largely unchanged. For the last 5 years, the European Parliament in Brussels has made the Green Deal its primary issue. Voters from all over Europe said, "No more." The hardcore climate warming alarmists are no longer scaring all the people. They are scaring a dwindling portion of some of the people. Farmers throughout Europe have been vocally and visibly protesting Brussels' new and proposed carbon dioxide reducing regulations for months. Yes, you are correct that the visibility of the farmers' protests has not made it onto the nightly news in the United States, but it's been all over X, which is now reputedly the world's largest propagator of news, precisely because it is mostly uncensored. And if you are in France, Germany, the Netherlands, Britain, and many other European countries, it has been impossible to not notice the massive tractor blockades in European streets and the spreading of manure on the doorsteps of Green Deal enforcers. Green Party losses in France and Germany dropped the rank of the Green Bloc in the European Parliament from 4th to 6th. The Green-allied Renew Europe party was decimated. The party led by Emmanuel Macron in France lost badly to parties on the right. It no longer exists in Spain and also lost seats in Estonia, Romania, and Denmark. What's the takeaway for American elections this fall? If anyone is listening, it's clear that a full-throated refutation and promise to reverse the Green News scam will be an effective campaign message. The Democrats are clearly in the camp of trying to fool some of the people some of the time. Trump is trying out the phrase Green News scam, but he also promised to drain the swamp and ended up nearly drowning in it. RFK won't do anything because with the issue, given his background as an environmental lawyer. Could be a breakthrough issue for Chase Oliver. I'm Richard Fields with this week's Report from the Fields. See you again next week.
You know, the consequences of this far left takeover of our institutions, you know, if they genuinely are afraid of the far right resurgence, they would look at themselves in the mirror and see why we're getting a far right resurgence, because it's them. They are the ones who are responsible for this. And the refusal to accept that is part of the problem that they are having.
Oh, I think it's a good problem. And then, you know, one of the things, we look at a lot of sources, folks, and one of the things we looked at was France 24. I think you looked at that, you pulled that one up, yeah. And France 24 is a government-funded broadcasting company in France that broadcasts in Spanish, English, French, I think Italian, a bunch of other, kind of like Radio Free something, I don't know. So, of course, they have the same kind of bias that National Propaganda Radio has here, NPR. They look at things and they say, oh, a far right surge. Again, we talked about this next week. So what happens is if you're a left radical, you only surround yourself with left radicals. Yep. And so you believe that what you believe is what everybody else believes. And
yeah, you live in a bubble.
Yeah, you live in a bubble. Okay, there it is. And the fact is that what they're labeling, there are a few people that are far right. There's some out and out fascists that have come to power in some countries. But
well, there's also outright communists that have come to power in some
well,
countries.
no, have been in power.
These things balance each other out.
Yeah. And we saw the same thing happen. The same thing has unfortunately happened in South America. I mean, you bounce from far right dictatorship to far left, but in this case, most of the people that have won elections that they're calling far right are about what we'd call, in the old days, we'd call the Goldwater Republican, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of these countries, they bought this dream that they needed to gather together and it was a sales pitch that was sold to them in the EU. We need one common currency. The Brits were smart enough not to be part of that. We're going to have a parliament, but the parliament's really just kind of be a loose organization. We're still going to have complete autonomy in our old countries, and we're not going to be really ruled by the EU. Well, they are ruled by the EU, and they're paying consequences for it. And you don't see any of this that Mr. Fields just talked about on our TV here, but they make that truckers convoy that happened in Canada that Trudeau illegally stopped by seizing assets. He's going to get thrown out on his butt here pretty quick, so that's a good thing. There's a backlash there. I don't know when the backlash in California is coming, but I might move back here when it does. So when you see far right, far left, look at who's reporting this stuff. I mean, look at the bias of the person. And this is simply a reflection of people being fed up. They're being fed up by every single action that they take, being controlled by a government that they were told wouldn't control them. The EU is supposed to be loose, umbrella. It's controlling everything. They were told that, we're going to absorb some immigrants from these horrible countries where there's war and all this stuff, inundated with immigration and really crushing the economies of a lot of these countries to be able to take care for. Sweden really has had to have a two-tiered benefit system to absorb all the people in there. They can't give the largesse that Swedish taxpayers have come to expect from the government because of their high tax burden, right? Free education, it's not free. Tax-paid education, tax-paid medical help. If people who are coming in are not providing any tax base, they can't do it. So they've set up a two-tiered system, and so it's a reaction to reality, and it's going to react even more. I'm thinking that spray painting Stonehenge might be the last straw.
Yeah, well, and there's we talk about the economic impacts, but there's a cultural impact that I actually think
people aren't assimilating. They aren't assimilating.
Yeah, it's far deeper
and
far more dangerous than we like to let on.
Yeah,
we pretend that these culture conflicts are just going to kind of smooth themselves over.
Not going away.
And they're not going to go away, not when you're talking about this type of level, or when you're talking about that there's no incentive for people to assimilate. It used to be when you would go to a country, you would assimilate as best you could. It was expected. Of course you do, because you're going to somebody else's country.
We have opened our arms to you, accept our ways.
Yes. And it doesn't mean like inside your house you can believe what you want.
You don't want to accept our ways. North Korea might be a good place to immigrate to. I'm sure they won't care what you say or do there, right?
Yeah, civility has taken a beating these last 10 years, and I think that's a long-term problem. But John, we're going to move back to the UK because one of your favorite places, Britain's museums are facing a new threat, John. And you almost want to laugh at these things, right?
This is so crazy that I don't even know if I can communicate how crazy this is. So, just one example. I don't remember the name of the country. Starts with an I. Country no longer exists. It was African.
I don't remember.
Okay, so the Igbo people. There were some masks that were probably taken by the Brits because they ruled the world and they used to take stuff. And it's in one of Britain's great museums. If you haven't done anything in your life, go to London and see the Victoria and Albert Museum, see the Natural History Museum, see their art museum. It's amazing. It's amazing.
We might be talking about the Ivory Coast, John, by the way. The
Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast. Okay, so country's no longer there, but one people in it, the Igbo, I think that's what they're called. They don't allow looking at the masks. I think I'm getting a little confused, but we can get you the story. The link will be there.
Yeah.
So women aren't supposed to look at the masks because it's part of a male ritual and all the rest of that. So rather than offend the people in a country that no longer exists that produced the masks, they've taken the masks down and put them in a room, right?
Yeah, so who's offended?
Well, nobody. So this brings up my whole story that we'll take an American version of this to talk about how crazy it is. We know there's no longer the Washington Redskins. There's no longer the Cleveland Indians. I'm sure I can go on, right? They took a poll of the First Nations tribes, like the Athabascans and not the Mohicans because they're gone, and the Mohawks, all the northeastern tribes, and there's literally probably 110 of them. They polled the people and asked them how offended they were by the name Washington Redskins, and they said, I don't care.
Yeah.
Who cares, bro?
Yeah, it was 90%. Last poll I saw, it was like 90%
it was
said
almost
they didn't care.
100%.
Yeah, no one cares.
No one cared. But the woke left went nuts and said that somehow this was, we're being offended on, in this case, in a museum in England. The people are dead. The country doesn't exist anymore. And besides that, who cares?
Well, just that. So an ancient culture thinks that women shouldn't look at this mask. So now women in the modern culture can't look at these masks.
Yeah.
And, you know.
But if you said to a woman on the street, sorry, ladies, you can't go in and look at my art exhibit. It's men only. What do you think would happen? They would be kicking the door down to go see that.
Of course they would.
So this nonsense makes, I mean, I try to get my head around the story. I don't know if I made sense, folks, but I really try to make sense.
The reason we can't make sense of the story is because the story makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
So something else that makes no sense, John, we're going to go ahead and move on. You know, there was a COVID hearing last week, 2 weeks ago, and you know, there was a witness that literally sat there and laid out the lab leak case. Now, it doesn't mean it's true, but, you know, the evidence is pretty dang strong that we should have investigated it more thoroughly early on. Because now it's far too late, right?
No, not at all. It's not too late because
too much stuff is deleted. Too much stuff has been. I don't think you're ever going to find out.
It's not too late. They'll deny it, but Fauci's closest circle in the emails that have finally come to light because somebody filed a FOIA request and he couldn't hide behind state secrets because it wasn't having to do with protecting our borders. It was about medicine. They were all exchanging emails which were since deleted saying that you know, this is obviously a lab leak. So this gentleman who's a respected, he's not a Nobel laureate, but he's a very valued professor. Did Bayesian? Yeah, I think it's Bayesian analysis, statistical analysis of all of the information that was out there, and walked Congress step by step. I know probably most of them were too stoned or drunk to understand what he was saying because they are congressmen after all. That the idea that this wasn't a lab leak is basically just nonsense based upon current science. Now, if you know, there are professional people who whose business is to look at how pandemics or epidemics happen and trace it back to the source. This has been done before over and over and over again, so you can find the source and make sure you kill it. You know, like for Ebola, what was the source? For AIDS, what was the source? They know how to do this forensic stuff, folks, and the forensic stuff points dramatically and purposefully and numerically to lab leak.
All right, John, we've got a couple minutes left, so I want to get to this one last story here for you. The U.S. Appeals Court, because this is one you wanted, U.S. Appeals Court holds the FERC approval for a
We can do the other one if you want.
expansion.
We can do the budget, or is that just too depressing?
That's too depressing, and we don't have time.
Okay,
So let's
so-
get to this one for you.
So finally, U.S. Appeals Court said that we can start moving gas through a pipeline. Sierra Club and all the rest of that said, oh no, you have to count emissions this way, and if you did, it would prevent it from, you can't count emissions this way, you have to add them all up and count them this way, and filed lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, not even thinking about the obvious thing that transporting anything through a pipeline is the best way to transport anything, because pipelines don't fall off the tracks into rivers. Pipelines can be secured. Pipelines might leak, yes, but they just run a pig through and plug it, and the leak goes away. You can blow holes, and please don't go do this, people, when I say you could do it. And they can plug it remotely within minutes, because you have to pump. It just doesn't flow through a pipeline. You have to pump it. It takes a lot of energy. It's the best way to move, especially toxic liquids. And they finally got out of the way to let it happen, so people will be able to heat their homes next winter.
All right, and to give you guys a bit, we got 2 minutes, John, so we do have time for this last one. Congressional Budget Office has raises this year's federal budget deficit projection by $400 billion. That's what they raised it by. That's not the budget deficit. That's how much it's increased since their previous projection. And what was the previous projection? $1 trillion? So
I have no idea. It was listed nowhere in this article.
I think it was $1 trillion, 1.1, something
Are you
like
sure?
that.
Only $1 trillion?
Yeah, and so now we're talking about $1.5 trillion deficit, at least. And that's just my memory, and we all know at this time of night how well my memory is working. So it could be more than $1.5 trillion, but on the conservative side, it's
and a lot of this was weapons for Israel, weapons for Ukraine, interest on debt.
Our interest on debt now exceeds the money we spend on military. Yeah.
As well it should.
Just plain interest.
Yeah.
That's just the interest payment, people.
So,
we're not even talking about getting the balance.
Can I do a 30-second close?
Yep.
All right, Thomas Sowell, if you don't, not familiar with him, one of the most brilliant people on the planet, a great speaker. We could balance the budget if all the U.S. government did was increase spending by 4% a year. We'd pretty soon have a balanced budget. But they have so little self-control, they're unwilling to do that and are dooming our great-great-grandchildren to living in caves.
So there
That's
you go.
my close.
Yeah. And just think of what they do if they have a 3% or a 2% increase a
Well,
year.
how about a surplus?
Well, how about you
like
just spend the same as
Argentina?
last year until you get the debt paid off? That's my solution. Just spend the same as you spent last year until you got all this knucklehead stuff paid off. But they won't do it.
No.
Because makes too much sense. Makes too much sense, and they can't handle that. Anyway, we are out of here tonight. Thank you, John, for being here. Thank you for watching. I want to thank the crew inside for working hard tonight. Please remember to love everybody and have a good night.
Thank you, Jay.